Hey guys, I'm Sun. I'm a privacy and security researcher, and you're watching the Privacy Guides. Today's episode, again, is not going to be about Borg, damn it. This is a follow-up to last episode, down the your computer isn't yours rabbit hole and how to patch macOS. At the end of the episode, I mentioned that you guys should perhaps run this command, and eventually privacy and security researchers would get to the bottom of this. Now, one of you sent me a link, thanks for that, an article by Jacopo. I hope I'm not messing that name up. Anyways, and that privacy and security researcher really did go down that rabbit hole in a wonderful way. So I'm not sure if you guys have read it. I'll link that in the description. But essentially, this is kind of where I left it yesterday. We had those URLs, and as mentioned in the other story that had broke, that included an identifier for apps, and it was a way for Apple to potentially track, and not just Apple actually, since this is not encrypted, pretty much anyone, track which apps we were using. Now, I had asked this other security researcher what that hash was all about, and I was asking if that person knew what the hash, how that hash was actually generated. Now, this story is really interesting because it does go down that rabbit hole, and it does explain. You should always do updates in Firefox, by the way, but I'm recording. It really does go down the rabbit hole, and this is what the hash includes. So it's essentially a certificate. So all of the speculation that was around that was perfectly normal, that was Apple validating if certificates are still correct or if they've been revoked and stuff like this, that's true. So does that mean that it's not a risk for our privacy and we can just go about undoing the patch? Not really. So let me explain this really quickly. It is somehow an equivalent to a hash for an app, but it's not for an app specifically. It's for a developer. So if we think about the Tor browser, I'm pretty sure that the developer certificate behind the builds of Tor browser don't apply to other non-privacy conscious apps, for instance. I mean, it's definitely bound to that developer. Same applies to Signal, for instance. So is this leaking the app? Is this part of a huge conspiracy? I'll leave you guys figure that out for yourselves. I mean, it really depends. I mean, I am really worried that those packages are sent in an unencrypted form. I don't understand why. By the way, someone did mention in a comment that the reason why it was sent using HTTP versus HTTPS is that it's used to validate SSL certificates. So you cannot validate an SSL certificate while on SSL because that creates an infinite loop. That makes a lot of sense. Now, we're not validating SSL certificates here. We're validating app development SSL certificates. I don't even think it has anything to do with SSL actually. So yeah, I'm really puzzled. I don't understand why Apple would send that traffic unencrypted. Maybe it's part of some kind of like an old standard. I mentioned in previous episodes that email was pretty shitty for privacy, and it's kind of because of how the protocols behind email work. So yeah, this is it. It is some kind of a hash. It will reveal that you're potentially using Tor. If you're using Tor and you don't have a VPN, it is bound to your actual IP. So I prefer disabling this. Now, another thing that was mentioned in that story that I shared yesterday is that the person was recommending, Jeffrey was recommending using Little Snitch. Just for those of you who, that link is in this episode here, and you have the full link here to Jeffrey Paul's story. So he was recommending using Little Snitch. What I said yesterday is that I actually use Little Snitch on my real computer. I've mentioned it a few times that this is a demo computer, so it's not my real computer. But essentially, I absolutely love Little Snitch, and I share Jeffrey's thought that I wouldn't really be comfortable using macOS if it wasn't for Little Snitch. So for those of you who don't know what Little Snitch is, in today's episode, we're going to go about setting up Little Snitch, and I'll kind of explain what it is, why I absolutely love it, and why, in my opinion, it's worth paying for it. So without further ado, I'll close Firefox. And what I did here, I went on the website of Little Snitch. I'll link that in the description. I downloaded the DMG and I installed Little Snitch. The process is a little bit tedious. It takes time, so I didn't want to do this on camera. But the one takeaway that I need to share right now is this is installing a kernel extension that is something that requires A, administrative privileges, B, allowing it explicitly, and C, rebooting your computer. So that's why that doesn't really work in the context of a normal privacy guide. So I did that. And just for you guys who might be less technical, we're going to be trying this. What's going to happen is you'll have to go into System Preferences. Whoops, this is kind of annoying. And you'll have to go into Security and Privacy. And on General, right here, there's going to be a place where you need to explicitly allow the Little Snitch kernel extension. Okay, so I did all of this, and this is what happens. This is what is on the screen after a reboot. So it asks us to allow a whole bunch of notifications. When we start using Little Snitch, it can definitely be overwhelming, and I'm going to show you guys why in a second. So I would recommend allowing notifications, but maybe eventually you'll want to disable them if you want a little bit of peace of mind. But for now, we're just going to go and just allow everything. And for the sake of it, we'll just kind of look at the tour here. So it says applications on your computer can send whatever information they want, blah, 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 blah. Connection alert. So when you go on a specific website, you'll need to allow things. I'll use this little moment here to explain what Little Snitch actually is. I'm pretty sure all of you by now, are familiar with going into System Preferences, and going into Security and Privacy, and then going into Firewall. And the firewall is on. That's something that I recommended in one of the first episodes of this series. But that firewall is very different than Little Snitch, although they're both considered firewalls. This firewall here, the one that ships with your Mac, is really what we call an inbound firewall. So it allows us to block apps that are trying to enter our computer, traffic, I should have said, that tries to enter our computer. And that is super useful. But in the context of privacy, we want to know what's going out of the computer. And that is where Little Snitch comes into play. Little Snitch is what I like calling, maybe it's an official word, an application layer firewall. So it allows us to allow inbound and outbound traffic by an application basis. And that is such a godsend. I mean, there are so many things happening on computers these days, and this allows us to see them. So this here is an example of a notification. We're going to see a whole bunch of them in a second. So that's cool. Internet access policy. Okay, that's cool. I'll show all of this in a second. Maybe I shouldn't have gone through this. Yeah, so sorry about this. I'm just going to skip all of this because we're going to have a look at this in depth. Good. Wow, there's a lot of stuff here. Cool. Okay. So it's currently in demo mode. I could enter my license. Maybe I'll do this later, but we'll start in demo mode because that might be what you guys are using. Okay, so this here is the view that we have when we get into Little Snitch for the first time. This is the network monitor. And what is really cool of the network monitor, so we can start by setting where we are. So I am in Iceland. I use a VPN and all my traffic is routed through Iceland. So I'll set my location there. And then here on the left, we get to see all of the apps that are currently accessing the internet. And we get to see that traffic on an app by app basis. This is such a fundamental, important part of our privacy stack. I was waiting before talking about Little Snitch because it's a little more complicated than other things and it requires an app that we pay for. Some of you, by the way, recommended or asked questions about alternatives that might be free. I'll look into them. And that might be the subject of a future episode. But for now, let's talk about Little Snitch. So let's configure things. So the first thing here is we get to see all of those apps. We can configure them here, but that's not really the way I like doing things. And I'm going to suggest a different way. So first things first, we want to go into operation mode and set it to alert. Right now it's in silent mode and it allows connections and it kind of logs them in this network monitor, but I really want to have to explicitly allow everything. And as you'll see in today's episode, that's kind of a painstaking thing to do, but it's so rewarding. So if we switch this right now, things are going to start popping, okay? And before we go there, let's configure a few other things in the Little Snitch preferences. Okay, so we can see here that it's in alert mode. This here is fine. We won't touch those defaults. Now, if we go into monitor, I like to switch color to monochrome. That just means that this stuff up here is going to be black and white. I kind of like that. Maybe you like things differently. That's totally cool. If we go into apps, that's fine. We don't want to switch profiles. We could switch profiles based on the network that we're on. There's a whole bunch of features that I won't discuss in today's episode, as this is kind of like a getting started episode. The defaults here are pretty robust. By the way, Little Snitch is such an amazing app from a security standpoint. Oh, here you go, Malvad trying to connect. And that's actually a really interesting thing because I'm not using Malvad as my VPN. What just happened here, this is why Little Snitch is such an important part of our security stack. And I should have said privacy actually, but both. But back to this in a second. So the people that are behind Little Snitch really, really take our privacy and our security seriously. I wrote to their tech support a few times and they're super thorough. It's an app that's developed, I think, in Austria. I'll have to confirm that in a second, but so it's an app that's developed within the European Union. So again, better privacy and security legislation. It's not developed in the States, which I really appreciate. Same for Malvad. Okay, so I just wanted to really give them a shout out because it's unbelievable the quality of the work that they're doing. So what we're seeing here in the context of Malvad, well, clearly I still have the daemon running. I did an episode on Malvad and I'm not using Malvad, but then I can see that the daemon is trying to connect. Now that might be totally normal if I was using Malvad, but I'm not. So the cool thing with Little Snitch is that I can then tell it any connection to forever deny those connections. And that means that from that point on, my computer cannot, well, actually from the point where we switched operation mode to alert mode, that means that our computer will ask us to authorize everything going in or out. It's such a great thing. So looking at advanced, approve rules automatically. I don't think we want that here. Let me just read it because, by the way, I haven't configured Little Snitch in like a gazillion years. As always, it's really important to take the time to read things thoroughly, double check them using DuckDuckGo. Computer literacy is really everything in the context of what we're learning here on the privacy guides. So selecting an unapproved rule in the rules window approves this rule automatically. We don't want stuff to be done automatically. We want it to check for updates, and then we want to deliberately tell it when to update, and that's pretty much it for this. Little Snitch configuration will now quit. However, network filter will continue to operate in the background. So that's pretty cool. We don't want it to tell us again when we restart the computer. That will start automatically. Okay, cool. So as we can see, all of this stuff here, those rules will ask us now for explicit consent. So what we can see here, and that's interesting, Firefox is trying to connect to push.services.mozilla.com. Now, the typical thing, and that's where when I mentioned earlier that it's pretty overwhelming at first. Well, what is push.services.mozilla.com? So if we pop open Firefox here and we try to search for it, what will happen next is nothing. Why? Because we need to explicitly allow everything for a specific app on a domain by domain basis or a host name basis. So if this one here, I'm like, I don't know what it is. I think it's good at first when you're not sure about something. Instead of saying forever, you can toggle this and say for 10 minutes. So right now, I'll deny this for 10 minutes. And this will then allow me to do my DuckDuckGo search. And then if you're really paranoid about privacy and security, you can do this on a hostname basis. So you can allow an app to access the internet within the context of a specific hostname. And probably some of you are used to using firewalls, and then you have to allow or deny stuff using IPs. So that's like computer level stuff. This here is super relatable for humans. So we're like, okay, DuckDuckGo, cool, I'll allow it. And once this is done, my search will go true. So I'm like, well, okay, Mozilla Push Services. Push is the server-side project supporting push notifications in Firefox. The current server is auto push, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we now know that, okay, it's part of some kind of a push notification system. To tell you the truth, I tend to allow Firefox to access all host names because allowing it on a host by host basis is super intense. So next time, say we want to go on YouTube, or okay, let's go on my website. You'll see that, oh, it's going to ask us again. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to tell it, and it's not something like everyone has, a different way of dealing with this, but you might want to do this on a hostname by hostname basis. That's actually a way of, blocking ad servers and stuff like this. But I'm just going to tell it for the purpose of today's episode. I'm going to say, you know what? Finally, allow any connection forever. So once I do this, I can then go on pretty much any website. And if we go on, something else, let's say we have a look at last episode, YouTube is just going to work fine and stuff like this. Okay, now, next thing I want to show you is if we close this, and that's actually a nice way to see that, everything we do on the internet actually reaches all corners of the world. But if we close this, and then we go into the rules, and that is something that is so very crucial. Here, we're going to see a whole bunch of rules. So the first thing that we can see here is there are a whole bunch of rules that are enabled by default. So if we go in iCloud services, there's a bunch of rules that are whitelisted so that our computers operate as usual. If we go into macOS services, same thing. Now, if we go into redundant rules, we can see that initially we had only allowed outbound for DuckDuckGo, but then we eventually allowed any connection. So we can go about deleting this, and that's cool. The next thing here that you guys might notice is in last episode, or actually in Jeffrey's story, we can see here that trustd. So that here, this is the actual daemon responsible for sending those requests that include the applications that we're using, or I should say the certificates, the developer certificates for those applications. So in yesterday's episode or last episodes, actually that's interesting. You see, again, every time you use an app when you're in alert mode, it will ask you for your consent. So this, iTerm wants to connect to iTerm 2. This is probably done for detecting updates, but again, I'm not sure and I'm busy and I don't want to worry about it. So I'll say, for 10 minutes, deny it. Okay, now, so if we have a look at /etc/hosts, we can see that I have blocked, and that's, if you haven't seen last episode, I'll link it in the description, but I blocked this. But another way of doing this, so this I blocked on a, whoops, interesting. Okay, so what you're seeing here is, interesting, okay. So my VPN was just terminated. So I had a VPN connection going, but I need to actually allow the connection from my server to my VPN. I will have to mask this IP address, clearly note to self, but I will allow this forever to make sure that my VPN will go true so I can now reconnect to my self-hosted VPN. By the way, there's an episode on the privacy guides on how to set up your own StrongSwan self-hosted VPN. Okay, so right now I'm doing a local host loop to make sure that this domain can never be called. But another option, and that's what was recommended by Jeffrey in the context of Little Snitch, is to essentially disallow this here. So I can disable this, disable that. And what will happen now if I didn't have that local host hack is trustd would not be able to access the internet anymore. Now, this is a good time to mention that there are a whole bunch of quirks between Little Snitch and the new version of macOS, Big Sur. Everything I'm saying today is valid for Catalina. I'm not sure it is for Big Sur. I haven't upgraded, and by the way, I always recommend waiting before you guys upgrade. There's always some really weird stuff that comes out, and I always regret that I've upgraded. So I always wait for a few months before doing so. So everything today is valid for Catalina only. So this is kind of cool. Now, if we look at everything else here, all of those different services, so TimeD, System Policy D, those are all things that I would recommend, looking up in DuckDuckGo and seeing, do you really need this? Is that really something that you need? And again, cleaning up rules here. Okay. Now, if we look at last 24 hours, that's where all of the rules that we've approved now, in the last 24 hours will show up. So sometimes you approve something and then you have second thoughts about it. This is where you can go and just delete it. And there's also the concept of temporary rules. That's what we did for iTerm 2. So temporary rules are rules that are only valid for a specific amount of time. And that's super useful when you're just debugging something and you don't want to make that change permanent. Okay, let me just look really quickly if I'm not forgetting something. Now, just for the sake of it, okay, if I pop open Visual Studio Code, usually there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens. So let's have a look. Actually, I don't have code because when you open code, it starts calling home quite a bit. There you go. So why, I'm not doing anything right now in Visual Studio Code. Why would it want to connect to Visual Code Experiments? Interesting. So you can click that little info thing here. Sometimes it gives us an idea of what's going on, but in this context, we can see that it's signed by Microsoft Corporation. So it's definitely something that's legitimate. But is it something that we want? Is it something that we want to approve? So then again, we want to take this here and we want to go and see what this is used for. Okay. So what is, experiments? What is Visual Code? I've turned it off. Telemetry and settings, not using Insider and been looking at that. Okay, so my experience with this is Visual Studio Code has something called experiments. It's a way for them to experiment with features. It's something that I've researched on my real computer. So if we go into the preferences and into settings, I don't remember if this will actually work, but experiments enable experiments, fetches experiments to run on Microsoft Online Services. Wow, I wasn't aware of this. I am on my other computer, but say we weren't. Again, Little Snitch made us realize that for some reason that we're not even aware of, our editor is trying to do something with experiments. So I'm going to disable this, right? So once you disable it and you close it, okay, I'm actually going to, I'll force quit it just for the sake of this episode. Oh, I could finish. When an app is closed and it was pending for approval, it says terminated here and you can then just cancel it. Wow. So why does it want to connect to dc.services? Okay, I could go over and I could go on and on and on and on and on. There are a gazillion things that our computers try to do online. And it is pretty overwhelming at first, but you can lock those things down and get control of things again. And that's what Little Snitch is all about. So in this context, I have no clue what DC Services is. Again, it's signed by Microsoft. So I would go about looking at this here and seeing what the hell this is all about. So we'll do that last one. So what is Microsoft Tech 2D? Okay. What is the user of? I don't know what user. The question, unfortunately, seems that telemetry for application inside currently, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so perhaps I haven't disabled telemetry. So let's pop that open again. Telemetry. Okay, so it's not telemetry. Anyways, it takes time. Computers call home all the time. We need to research all of those things one by one. When we're really busy, like right now, I want to move on for, finishing up this episode. We can say for 10 minutes, deny, and we're good. And again, it's trying to connect to something else. So you'll see our computers are always connecting to a million things. I'll stop this right now because, we could do this all night long. But essentially, everything here that you approved will eventually become a rule. So this here, I'll just deny it for 10 minutes. Oh, Bing settings search, traffic manager. That's interesting. That looks like something that we absolutely want to allow or deny forever, I should say. So yeah, Little Snitch, I cannot say, I could say good things about it, like not nonstop. But eventually you'll have a big fat configuration here And that's something that you guys will probably want to back up, because as you've seen right now, it takes a huge amount of time to set that up the initial time. That file, I'm not sure if my memory is going to be good here, but oops. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so there is a folder. This here is its path, okay? And that folder here, if we look at what's inside, we have the connections cache and we have the configuration file. The configuration file is what includes all of these rules, and that path, again, that path here is something that you guys would definitely want to back up using your backup system. It's something that I personally back up on a regular basis using both that episode on how to use rsync with Veracrypt, and I also back it up using Borg, more on Borg in probably next episode if something doesn't come up again. So anyways, that's all I have for you today. Little Snitch is amazing. I'm sure there are other alternatives and I'll be looking into them. But given I was using Little Snitch and it was mentioned in this TrustD episode, I thought it was worth just getting it out there. So yeah, I'll see you soon. Bye.